Chapter 15. Camels Are Evil. Yes, Carter, the whole business with the water demons must have been horrible, but I feel no sympathy for you, as one, you brought that trip entirely on yourself, and two, while you were rescuing Zia, I was dealing with camels. Camels are disgusting. You may think, but Sadie, these were magical camels summoned by one of Walt's amulets. Clever, Walt. Surely magical camels are not as bad as normal camels. I can now attest that magic camels spit like, poo like, drool like, bite like, eat like, and most disgustingly smell like normal camels. If anything, their disgustingness is magically enhanced. We didn't start with the camels, of course. We worked our way up to them in a series of progressively more horrible modes of transportation. First, we took a bus to a small town west of Alexandria, a bus without air conditioning, packed with men who had not discovered the benefits of underarm deodorant. Then we hired a driver to take us to Baharia, a driver who first had the nerve to play ABBA's greatest hits and eat raw onions, then drove us to the middle of nowhere and, surprise, introduced us to his friends, the bandits, who were keen to rob defenseless American teenagers. I was delighted to show them how my staff turned into a large, hungry lion. As far as I know, the bandits and driver are still running. However, the car had stopped, and no amount of magic would revive the engine. At that point, we decided it was best to stay off the grid. I could deal with dirty looks from the locals. I could deal with attracting attention as an oddity, an American/British girl with purple-streaked hair, traveling alone with a boy who did not look like her brother. In fact, that fairly well described my entire life, but after the highway robbery incident, Walt and I realized just how much the locals were watching us, marking us as a target. I had no desire to be singled out by more bandits, or Egyptian police, or even worse, any magicians who might be lurking under cover. So, we summoned the magic camels, charmed a handful of sand to point the way to Baharia, and set out across the desert. How was the desert, Sadie? You might wonder. Thanks for asking. It was hot. And another thing, why do deserts have to be so bloody huge? Why can't they be a few hundred meters wide, just enough to give you the idea of a sandy, dry, and miserable thing, and then yield to some proper landscape, like a meadow with a river, or a high street with shops? No such luck for us. The desert went on forever. I could imagine Seth, the god of the wastelands, laughing at us as we trudged over endless dunes. If this was his home, I didn't think much of the way he decorated. I named my camel Katrina. She was a natural disaster. She slobbered everywhere and seemed to think the purple streak in my hair was some kind of exotic fruit. She was obsessed with trying to eat my head. I named Walt's camel Hindenburg. He was almost as large as a zeppelin and definitely as full of gas. As we rode side by side, Walt seemed lost in thought, peering at the horizon. He'd rushed to my aid in Alexandria without hesitation. As I'd suspected, our Shen amulets were connected. With a little concentration, I'd been able to send him a mental message about our predicament. With a bit more effort, I'd been able to literally pull him through the dewar to my side. Quite a handy magic item. Instant hot guy. Once here, though, he'd grown increasingly quiet and uncomfortable. He was dressed like a normal American teen on an outdoor excursion. A black workout top that fit him quite well, hiking pants and boots. But if you look more closely, you could tell he'd come equipped with every magic item he'd ever made. Around his neck hung a veritable zoo of animal amulets. 3 rings glinted on each hand. Around his waist was a corded belt I'd never seen before, so I assumed it had magic powers. He also carried a backpack, no doubt stuffed with more handy bits and bobs. Despite this personal arsenal, Walt seemed awfully nervous. Lovely weather, I prompted. He frowned, coming out of his daze. Sorry, I was thinking. You know, sometimes talking helps. For instance, I don't know, if I had a major problem, something life-threatening, and I only confided to Jazz, and if Bess knew what was going on but wasn't telling, and if I'd agreed to come on an adventure with a good friend and had hours to chat as we crossed the desert, I might be tempted to tell her what was wrong. Hypothetically, he said. Yes, and if this girl were the last person on Earth to know what was wrong with me, and really cared, well, I can imagine she'd get quite frustrated at being kept in the dark. And she might hypothetically strangle you. I mean, me. Hypothetically. Walt managed a faint smile, though I can't say his eyes melted me like Anubis's. He did have a gorgeous face. He looked nothing like my father, but he had the same sort of strength and rugged handsomeness. A kind of gentle gravity that made me feel safer, and a bit more firmly planted on the earth. It's hard for me to talk about, he said. I didn't mean to hide anything from you. Fortunately, it's not too late. Our camels plodded along. Katrina tried to kiss or possibly spit on Hindenburg, and Hindenburg farted in response. I found this a depressing commentary on boy-girl relationships. At last, Walt said, It has to do with the blood of the pharaohs. You guys, I mean, the Canes, you combined 2 powerful royal lines, Narmer and Ramses the Great, right? So I've been told. Sadie the Great does have a nice ring to it. Walt didn't respond to that. Perhaps he was imagining me as a pharaoh, which I'll admit is a rather frightening concept. My royal line, he hesitated. How much do you know about Akhenaten? Off the top of my head, I'd say he was a pharaoh, probably of Egypt. Walt laughed, which was good. If I could keep his mood from getting too serious, it might be easier for him to open up. Top of the class, he said. Akhenaten was the pharaoh who decided to do away with all the old gods and just worship Aten, the sun. Oh. Right. The story vaguely rang a bell, which alarmed me, as it made me feel like almost as much of an Egyptian geek as Carter. He's a chap who moved the capital, eh? Walt nodded. He built an entirely new city at Amarna. He was kind of a weird dude, but he was the first one who had the idea that the old gods were bad. He tried to ban their worship, shut down their temples. He wanted to worship only one god, but he made a strange choice for the one god. He thought it was the sun. Not the sun god Ra, the actual sun disk, Aten. Anyway, the old priests and magicians, especially the priests of Amun-Ra. Another name for Ra, I guessed. More or less, Walt said. So, the priests of Amun-Ra's temple weren't too happy with Akhenaten. After he died, they defaced his statues, tried to wipe out his name from all the monuments and stuff. Amarna was completely abandoned. Egypt went back to the old ways. I let that sink in. Thousands of years before Iskandar had issued a rule exiling the gods, a pharaoh had the same idea. And this was your whatever grandfather? I asked. Walt wrapped the camel's reins around his wrist. I'm one of Akhenaten's descendants, yeah. We got the same aptitude for magic as most royal lines, but we got problems, too. The gods weren't happy with Akhenaten, as you can imagine. His son, Tutankhamun. King Tut? I asked. You're related to King Tut? Unfortunately, Walt said. Tutankhamun was the first to suffer the curse. He died at 19, and he was one of the luckier ones. Hang on, what cause? That's when Katrina came to a screeching halt. You may protest that camels can't screech, but you're quite wrong. As you reached the top of a massive sand dune, Katrina made a wet, screechy sound, much worse than a car's brakes. Hindenburg came to more of a farting halt. I looked down the other side of the dune. Below us in the middle of the desert, a hazy valley of green fields and palm trees sprawled out, roughly the size of central London. Birds flew overhead. Small lakes sparkled in the afternoon sun. Smoke rose from cooking fires at a few dwellings dotted here and there. After so long in the desert, my eyes hurt from looking at all the colours, like when you come out of a dark cinema into a bright afternoon. I understood how ancient travellers must have felt, discovering an oasis like this after days in the wilderness. It was the closest thing I'd ever seen to the Garden of Eden. The camels hadn't stopped to admire the beautiful scenery. A trail of tiny footprints wound through the sand, all the way from the edge of the oasis to our dune. And coming up the hill was a very disgruntled-looking cat. It's about time, said the cat. I slid off Katrina's back and stared at the cat in amazement. Not because it spoke, I'd seen stranger things, but because I recognized the voice. Bast, I said. What are you doing inside the... What is that exactly? The cat stood on its hind legs and spread its front paws like, voila! An Egyptian ma, of course. Beautiful leopard spots, bluish fur. Looks like it's been through an blender. I wasn't just being harsh. The cat was terribly beaten up. Large chunks of its fur were missing. It might have once been beautiful, but I was more inclined to think it had always been feral. Its remaining fur was dirty and matted, and its eyes were swollen and scarred almost as badly as Vlad Menshikov's. Bast, or the cat, whatever was in charge, dropped back on all fours and sniffed indignantly. Sadie dear, I believe we talked about battle scars on cats. This old Tom is a warrior. A warrior who loses, I thought, but I decided not to say that. Walt slid off Hindenburg's back. Bast, how... Where are you? Still deep in the duat, she sighed. It'll be another day at least before I can find my way out. Things down here are a bit... chaotic. Are you all right? I asked. The cat nodded. I just have to be careful. The abyss is teeming with enemies. All the regular paths and riverways are guarded. I'll have to take a long detour to get back safely, and since the equinox starts tomorrow at sunset, the timing's going to be tight. I thought I'd better send you a message. So, Walt knit his eyebrows. That cat isn't real. Of course it's real, Bast said. Just controlled by a sliver of my ba. I can speak through cats easily, you know. At least for a few minutes at a time. But this is the first time you've really been close to one. Did you realize that? Unbelievable. You really need to hang around more cats. By the way, this ma will need a reward when I'm gone. Some nice fish, perhaps, or some milk. Bast, I interrupted. You said you had a message. Right. Apophis is waking. Yeah, we knew that. But it's worse than we thought, she said. He's got a legion of demons working on his cage, and he's timing his release to coincide with your waking Ra. In fact, he's counting on your freeing Ra. It's part of his plan. My head felt like it was turning to jelly, though that may have been because Katrina the camel was sucking on my hair. Apophis wants us to free his archenemy. That makes no sense. I can't explain it, Bast said. But as I got closer to his cage, I could glean his thoughts. I suppose because we fought so many centuries, we have some sort of connection. At any rate, the equinox begins tomorrow at sunset, as I said. The following dawn, the morning of March 21st, Apophis intends to rise from the duat. He plans to swallow the sun and destroy the world, and he believes your plan to awaken Ra will help him do that. Walt frowned. If Apophis wants us to succeed, why is he trying so hard to stop us? Is he? I asked. A dozen small things that had bothered me over the past few days suddenly clicked together. Why Apophis had only scared Carter in the Brooklyn Museum, when the errors of Sekhmet could have destroyed him. How he'd escaped so easily from St. Petersburg. Why he'd set volunteered the location of this third scroll. Apophis wants chaos, I said. He wants to divide his enemies. If Ra comes back, it could throw us into a civil war. The magicians are already divided. The gods would be fighting each other. There'd be no clear ruler. And if Ra isn't reborn into a strong new form, if he's as old and feeble as I saw in my vision. So, we shouldn't awaken Ra? Walt asked. That's not the answer either, I said. Bass tilted her head. I'm confused. My mind was racing. Katrina the camel was still chewing on my hair, turning it into a slimy mess, but I hardly noticed. We have to stick to the plan. We need Ra. Ma'at and Chaos have to balance, right? If Apophis rises, Ra has to as well. Walt twisted his rings. But if Apophis wants Ra awakened, if he thinks it'll help him destroy the world, we have to believe Apophis is wrong. I remembered something Jazz's Wren had told me. We choose to believe in Ma'at. Apophis can't imagine that anyone could unite the gods and magicians, I said. He thinks the return of Ra will weaken us even further. We have to prove him wrong. We have to make order from chaos. That's what Egypt has always done. It's a risk, a huge risk. But if we do nothing because we fear we'll fail, we'll play right into Apophis' hands. It's hard to give a rousing speech with a camel licking your head, but Walt nodded. The cat didn't look quite so enthusiastic. Then again, cats rarely do. Don't underestimate Apophis, Bass said. You haven't fought him. I have. Which is why we need you back quickly. I told her about Vlad Menchikov's conversation with Set, and his plans to destroy Brooklyn House. Bass, our friends are in terrible danger. Menchikov is possibly even more insane than Amos realizes. As soon as you're able, go to Brooklyn. I have a feeling our last stand is going to be there. We'll get the third scroll and find Ra. I don't like last stands, the cat said. But you're right. It sounds bad. By the way, where are Bess and Carter? She looked suspiciously at the camels. You didn't turn them into those, did you? The idea is appealing, I said. But no. I told her briefly what Carter was up to. Bast hissed with distaste. A foolish detour! I'll have words with that dwarf about letting you go off on your own. What am I, invisible? Walt protested. Sorry, dear. I didn't mean... The cat's eyes twitched. It coughed like it had a hairball. My connection's failing. Good luck, Sadie. The best entrance to the tombs is on a small date farm just to the southeast. Look for a black water tower. And do watch out for the Romans. They're quite... The cat puffed off its tail. Then it blinked and looked around in confusion. What Romans? I asked. They're quite what? Meow. The cat stared at me with an expression that said, Who are you? And where's the food? I swatted the camel's nose away from the slimy hair. Come on, Walt, I grumbled. Let's go find some mummies. We provided the cat with bits of beef jerky and some water from our supplies. It wasn't as good as fish and milk, but the cat seemed happy enough. As it was in sight of the oasis and obviously knew its way around better than we did, we left it to finish its meal. Walt turned the camels back into Amulet, thank goodness, and we trudged into Bahari on foot. The date farm wasn't difficult to find. The black water tower sat on the edge of the property, and it was the tallest structure in sight. We made our way toward it, weaving through acres of palm trees which provided some shade from the sun. An adobe farmhouse stood in the distance, but we didn't see any people. Probably the Egyptians knew better than to be out in the afternoon heat. When we reached the water tower, I didn't see any obvious tomb entrance. The tower looked quite old, 4 rusty steel posts holding a round tank the size of a garage about 15 meters in the air. The tank had a slow leak. Every few seconds water dropped from the sky and smacked against the hard-packed sand underneath. There wasn't much else in sight except for more palm trees, a few tarnished farm tools, and a weathered plywood sign lying on the ground. The sign was spray-painted in Arabic and English, probably from some attempt by the farmer to sell his wares to the market. The English read, Dates, best price. Cold Bepsi. Bepsi? I asked. Pepsi, Walt said. I read about that on the internet. There's no P in Arabic. Everyone here calls it Bepsi. So you have to have Bepsi with your pizza? Probably. I snorted. If this is a famous dig site, shouldn't there be more activity? Archaeologists, ticket booths, souvenir merchants. Maybe Bass sent us to a secret entrance, Walt said. Better than sneaking past a bunch of guards and caretakers. Our secret entrance sounded quite intriguing, but unless the water tower was a magic teleporter, or one of the date trees had a concealed door, I wasn't sure where this oh-so-helpful entrance might be. I kicked the Bepsi sign. There was nothing underneath except more sand, slowly turning to mud from the drip-drip-drip of the leaky tower. Then I looked more closely at the wet spot on the ground. Hang on. I knelt. The water was pooling in a little canal, as if the sand was seeping into a subterranean crack. The crevice was about 1 meter long and no wider than a pencil, but much too straight to be natural. I dug in the sand. 6 centimeters down, my fingernails scraped stone. Help me clear this, I told Walt. A minute later, we uncovered a flat paving stone about 1 meter square. I tried to work my fingers under the wet edges, but the stone was too thick and much too heavy to lift. We can use something as a lever, Walt suggested. Pry it up. Or, I said, stand back. Walt looked ready to protest, but when I brought out my staff, he knew enough to get out of the way. With my new understanding of godly magic, I didn't so much think about what I needed as feel a connection to Isis. I remembered a time when she'd found her husband's coffin grown into a trunk of a cypress tree, and in her anger and desperation, she blew the tree apart. I channeled those emotions and pointed at the stone. Hadi! Good news. The spell worked even better than in St. Petersburg. The hieroglyph glowed at the end of my staff, and the stone was blasted to rubble, revealing a dark hole underneath. Bad news, that's not all I destroyed. Around the hole, the ground began to crumble. Walt and I scrambled backward as more stones fell into the pit, and I'd realized I just destabilized the entire roof of a subterranean room. The hole widened until it reached the support legs of the water tower. The water tower began to creak and sway. Run! Walt yelled. We didn't stop until we were hiding behind a palm tree 30 meters away. The water tower sprang 100 different leaks, wobbled back and forth like a drunken man, then fell toward us and shattered, soaking us from head to toe and sending a flood through the rows of palm trees. The noise was so deafening, it must have been heard throughout the oasis. Oops, I said. Walt looked at me like I was mad. I suppose I was guilty as charged, but it's just so bloody tempting to blow things up, isn't it? We ran to the Sadie Kane Memorial Crater. It was now the size of a swimming pool. 5 meters down under a pile of sand and rocks were rows of mummies, all wrapped in old cloth and laid out on stone slabs. The mummies were now flattened, I'm afraid, but I could tell they'd been brightly painted with red, blue, and gold. Golden mummies? Walt looked horrified. Part of the tomb system that hasn't been excavated yet. You just ruined... I did say oops. Now help me down there before the owner of this water tower shows up with a shotgun.